Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. Each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me today. This is a great opportunity to educate you about another ministry that I think you'll enjoy hearing about. And let me just mention that next hour and the following, we will be dealing with a lot of the economic questions that many of you have had in terms of investment, finances, where the economy is going, those kinds of things. So I do want to have you certainly take the time to tune in and call in with some of your comments and questions. But this is an hour I like to sometimes feature different ministries, and this one is a ministry that you may not have heard of. It's called Bridge Builders International, and the individual that we're going to be talking about and talking with is Charles Kelley. He grew up in a Latvian-American home in Los Angeles and attended the Church of the Open Door, which is, where, of course, where J. Vernon McGee was the pastor. Studied at Biola University, later studied pastoral ministry at Southwestern Seminary in Fort Worth, earned an MA in Biblical Studies from Dallas Theological Seminary, and has a real interest in music as well as in the arts. We're going to talk about that in just a minute. Has been a pastor in a number of different locations. Now is located in Oregon, and for a number of years there was senior pastor of First Baptist Church in Corvallis, Oregon. In 1994, founded the group we're going to be talking about, Bridge Builders International. 5 years later, also launched an affiliate partners association, and we'll talk about that. In terms of his love of art and painting, was a good friend of the late American artist Thomas Kinkade. Matter of fact, I've got a Thomas Kinkade diagram here, and actually a tree that you can see if you happen to tune in today. Serves on the board of the directors of the Thomas Kinkade Museum, and also started a ministry to artists and musicians over there in Latvia, Imago Dei Latvia, and joins us now by phone from Philomath, Oregon. So, Charles Kelley, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Well, thank you, and it's good to meet you on the phone.
Well, maybe someday when I'm in Corvallis or Philomath, I'll come and say hi to you, but let's, if we can, educate people about Latvia. When you say that name, Latvia, Estonia, Lithuania, some of those countries, people go, I'm not even sure where they are. I don't know how big they are. I don't know why they're significant. So on your website, one of the first questions you seek to answer is why Latvia? Can you explain that for us?
Well, Latvia, even though it's a very small country, let's say the size of Ireland, it has a strategic location, and everybody knows that when you're thinking about real estate or property or places, location is really important. It's right on the Baltic Sea in northeastern Europe. It was a part of the Soviet Union, became free in 91, but because of its location, enemy nations have been wanting to conquer and occupy Latvia since the Vikings first started in the 9th century. And so they've been ruled by the Vikings, the Crusaders, the Germans, the Lithuanians, the Poles, Peter the Great's Russia. And then in 1918, Latvia became free. In fact, just 100 years ago, last Sunday, it declared its independence for the first time. And then came Soviet Union occupation in 1940. In 41, the Nazis came and occupied Latvia for 3.5 years. Soviets came back in 44, and Latvia then became free in 1991. It's a strategic location. It has ports. It's right on the sea, and everybody wants it. But the Latvians want it too.
And again, that's one of the other things I think is kind of intriguing, as you said. When you've been conquered so many times, oftentimes you lose your national identity. Now, of course, some exceptions to that. One of those would be the Jews, which found themselves overrun many times, and even the diaspora. But it is amazing the perseverance of the Latvians over all of these centuries of occupation.
That's a great insight. Latvia, like the other Baltic countries, it's been very important for them to maintain their culture and their language. And, of course, Soviet Russification policy always tried to destroy the cultures of the lands where they've occupied. But they didn't quite succeed in Latvia, though when the Soviet Union finally imploded in 1991 and Latvia became free, 40% of Latvia was Russian-speaking, people that were imported into Latvia. Many fine people, but that's not the point. Soviet Union was trying to destroy the culture and the language, but it has prevailed. Latvians are very old people. People from northern India began to immigrate north and west during the time of Abraham. And, and the language is a distant relative to Sanskrit. And so this is a very old people. The capital city is 800 years old. And so they're not going to lie down and die very quickly.
Yes, one of my colleagues goes to Belarus every year, which is, of course, something that actually parallels where Lithuania and Latvia are. And, of course, it just gives you a sense that Latvia is not that far from Moscow comparatively. And so to see that even though it is not under Soviet domination or Russian domination at the moment, you can, of course, see what Vladimir Putin intends. But let's talk about your ministry for a couple of minutes, because that, I think, is the key issue here. You first visited Latvia, having grown up in a home where you had some background in that regard, but you visited it 30 years ago, so you saw the Latvia back then that was under Soviet domination, and you've seen some remarkable changes. But what's been the kind of the spiritual pilgrimage, if you will, of that country?
Well, spiritually, it was pagan until the Crusaders came, and their version of the gospel wasn't all that loving and kind. It was convert or lose your head. But through the centuries, Latvia then became more of a Lutheran nation. It became the nationalized church was the Lutheran Church. But then, of course, there are many Orthodox and Catholics who are there. Then the fourth largest group are the Baptists. But during the war and after the war, of course, it officially became an atheistic country. And so I would say that most of the people are highly secularized. They have some reference to historic faith or religion or a loyalty to Lutherans, Catholics, Orthodox, or what have you. But by and large, it is a secular country. We have seen, however, God do wonderful things in many different ways over these 30 years through major evangelism efforts, through sister church partnerships, through the establishment of schools and publishing houses, through strategic outreaches to all sorts of people, like business people, farmers, orphans, artists, musicians, politicians. And so God's at work there, even when there's tough times in the culture.
Sure.
And politically.
Let's take a break. We'll talk a little bit more about what you are doing and how people can be involved with your outreach there to Latvia. All that coming up right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
When the internet was growing, we often heard promises that the World Wide Web would usher in a digital utopia. It would connect diverse communities and promote democratic values across the world. Fred Bauer, in a recent article, suggests that the dream of digital equality has become a nightmare. In some ways, social media has fulfilled some of its promises. Every person can have a platform and can theoretically connect with people around the world. You don't have to master some of the complex computer codes that many of us had to learn decades ago. The user-friendly platforms make it possible for just about anyone to build a platform and establish a digital community. But the harsh reality is that these social media platforms have coalesced around a small number of powerful players. These high-tech giants have immense power in determining which voices are heard and which are eliminated. Sometimes it's done by human actions, but often it is accomplished by shifting algorithms that determine who can be heard and who is eliminated. We often hear about the social media mobs that demonstrate a mob mentality towards views and people they dislike. But Fred Bauer explains that many of these movements are not bottom-up affairs. They are social media pressure campaigns harnessed by people who already have significant platforms. They merely pick out targets for their followers to attack and collaborate with others in order to make their message seem larger than it actually may be. His article is a reminder that many of these online battles on social media should not be seen as a reaction from the people, but actually orchestrated campaigns against selected targets. This isn't the internet we were promised a few decades ago, and it's worth understanding how activists are using social media today against many of us. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kerby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Continue our conversation today with Charles Kelley, and again, he is with Bridge Builders International. We have links to that on our website. It's bridgebuildersint.com. You don't have to even remember all that because we have the link there, and information about him on our website, pointofview.net. And Charles, let's talk about the strategic opportunity. Each year, and this next year I'll be teaching again at Hungary with Word of Life, and I love to use the illustration that the facilities there, they've got a castle and some other buildings, were originally used to indoctrinate students in Marxism. Now those same facilities are being used to educate the next generation of Christian leaders in Hungary and all sorts of other students who come from other countries. This is a real strategic opportunity, and there was a time maybe 30 years ago where you couldn't imagine a free Latvia, probably couldn't even imagine the kind of ministry that you have now. But talk about why now and what can actually be done in this particular outreach that you have.
Well, why now is a critical question, and as we have the opportunity now, the window is open now. Of course, one does not know how long Latvia or the Baltics will remain independent. With all my heart, I hope and pray that Russia will not come back and try to reoccupy again. But it has been Putin's public declaration that he wants to restore the borders of Peter the Great, which incidentally did not include Crimea, and he added them anyway. Mm-hmm. But I will say that this is we need to work while it's daylight, and there are opportunities. There's opportunities in many, many different levels for ministry and for outreach. our ministry started by coming alongside Latvian churches that had been under Soviet persecution. And we just wanted to help in any way. And as time went on, the help changed from basic help to basic training to more advanced training to just coming alongside them doing what they want to do so that we can do together what neither of us can do alone. And so we have ministries, for example, we have a camp that ministers to hundreds of kids and young people every summer. And we're always looking for some volunteers to come and spend 6 weeks and to work in the camp with the kids or on the property. That's a good ministry opportunity. There are opportunities as well to get involved with specific ministries, even with artists and with musicians. And this takes more of a specialized person, but the artists are, and the musicians are the most influential people in the country. And we have a wonderful, wide open door to minister to them and with them.
Well, again, you have a book that is out, Surprised by the Father's Plan, that kind of gives a little bit of the history of Bridge Builders International. But let me come back to both of those points you mentioned. First of all, camps. I've seen how Word of Life and other groups have used those camps, and Child Evangelism Fellowship. It does seem to me that if you're going to reach the next generation, parents who might never send their kids to a church, and even less likely for them to walk into the doors of a church, almost willingly send their kids to a camp. And at a camp, you can give them all sorts of great physical activity, but you can also give them a great spiritual input. Talk a little bit more about what that entails. And again, let's talk about how people can partner with you by maybe even attending one of those and being one of your servants.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, camp is critically important. It's been known for a long time that 70% of the decisions that young people make, children make to come to Christ, those decisions are made off the campus of the church, often in the setting of a camp or a retreat. This is true also in Latvia. In fact, it may even be truer. But we have a camp. It's called Eagle's Wings Camp, and it's in central Latvia. It's gorgeous, 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 and on about 300 acres. And there's a sheep farm that's operated by some believers, and they try to help fund it. So, but the sheep are there, hundreds of them, making it look like Psalm 23 almost. There are opportunities that we have every year to invite interns or volunteer staff to come and to work at the camp for 6 or 7 weeks, beginning the ending part of June. And we can be contacted if people are interested. There is, of course, always a need for financial support, scholarships for Latvian kids to go to camp, which is about $50 each. And when we have orphan camp, the scholarship needs are $100 each. Right. And these are very real needs, and these are life-changing things. One other thing about the camps is that our director, his name is Dimitri, or he goes by the nickname Dix, and he loves to train these kids and young people. So he has a training camp the last week of June, for example, and about 25 volunteers for the camp who are Latvian kids, they come. All of them came to Christ in the camps, and his internal leaders were saved and discipled through the camp, because the camp not only does week-long events, but whenever there's a school holiday, a fall a week, a winter week, a spring week, there's another full week of camp, and the kids come back. So in the summer, it's more outreach, and then in the fall, winter, and spring, it's discipleship-oriented. And so it's not only salvation, it's discipleship, it's leadership development, it's multiplication, and it's a very exciting model.
Now, again, you have the opportunity for camp counselors, for adult mentors. But, Charles, one of the questions I'm sure somebody's got on their mind is, Well, if I go, I'm sure I won't be able to speak the language. So how is all that facilitated?
Yeah, well, that is true, and the little kids in Latvia, they don't, the children, elementary age, they don't speak a lot of English, though more and more of them watch the Cartoon Network. But the teens, many of them are speaking English already, and there are plenty of people that help with translations. But let's say someone's volunteering as a lifeguard. You don't really need Latvian for that, or on the high ropes course, or in other recreational activities, or playing guitar in the band, or even helping in the kitchen, or doing some maintenance projects. There's a lot of things that can be done without the language.
So again, that's one aspect of that, the camp ministry. But you've mentioned some others. I know you have a women's ministry and a number of other things. So talk about some of those other outreaches that also exist under the auspices of Bridge Builders.
Mm-hmm. Probably the most visible one now, and the one that God seems to have been given a lot of momentum, is the ministry to artists and musicians. And it began about 5 years ago when we began to gather artists together and to just help them grow closer to God, closer to one another, and then to do creative things with one another. And then we began to dream together, what can we do together that we can't do alone, and we came up with the idea for exhibitions. And one of the ways that we really strengthen this whole movement is through our summer festival/camp for artists that take place in Latvia the last week of July. And we have had some foreigners, Americans or Swedes, have come and taken part in that as well. And most of the people there will speak English, but not all of them. Now, the purpose of this isn't just to make art, though that is very worthy, because art is a gift of God. The ability to create is part of being made in God's image. But it's to actually recognize that those who have artistic talents and gifts have corresponding callings that are seldom acknowledged in the church. And so they seldom have place in the church to really maximize their unique personalities, gifts, and callings, and so many don't go to church. And so this is an opportunity actually to do a lot of spiritual feeding with people and to help them think deeply and to encourage the artists to take initiatives to use those gifts to touch society in creative ways.
Yeah, let's take a break, and when we come back, I want to talk about that for just a minute, because it certainly relates not only to what you're doing in Latvia, but just what is a Christian view of the arts, and whether it's Francis Schaeffer, Hans Ruckmacher, or a number of others. Love to have that conversation with you, and so we will do that with Charles Kelley. If you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212, or just sit back, take some notes, and listen. We'll be back right after this.
There is no more dangerous time than when things are going well. Remember Elijah on Mount Carmel? Fire came down. There was no doubt who was God, but what happened next? He went from amazing faith to a time of great fear and depression. Many Christians have been very thankful a certain Democratic candidate for president was not the one to nominate two replacements for the Supreme Court. But as with Elijah, times of great victory are also times of great danger. Moments like this are not the time to take it easy. This is not the time to let our guard down. This is a time to double down on our work in the community, to serve and pray and plan and invest in a better future. This is the time to join Point of View's Truth Team 360 to make sure today's promising gains are not lost tomorrow. Show your commitment to our future by visiting pointofview.net/team or call 800-347-5151. Ask to join the Truth Team. Pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Charles Kelley with us as we are talking about Bridge Builders International, organization really reaching out to those in Latvia. But I thought for just a minute, Charles, since we talked about artists and musicians, and certainly using art has been an entree into the culture, and since I know that you have loved painting and have even begun painting, learning from some masters in Latvia, we might talk about that for just a minute, because it does seem to me that, as you mentioned just a minute ago, whether it's in Latvia or, frankly, sometimes even the United States, if you have artistic ability that's like musical, well, then people go, great, okay, I got a place for you in the church. But if you have artistic ability that involves dance, well, first of all, I don't know about that, or even painting or sculpture, things like that, we as believers really should be on the forefront of producing good art. We know that's not the case. So talk about this for just a minute, because certainly you have understood how important it is to really promote the arts and have used that into an entree into the culture in which you're working.
Well, it's an absolutely huge field, and it's a deep field to talk about and then to implement and to discuss in the church and also in society. So it's a great question, Kerby. I think when we first think about art, we have to think about its source. And this is the argument that Francis Schaeffer began with and has been carried forth by many others and developed further. And art is an expression of creativity, which is an expression of the imagination. And imagination is part of who God is. And because of God's character, because of God's all of God's attributes, and his imagination, his creative acts, and the creation of humans in his own image, then we, being created in his image, have been created to create. And this is not just something for fun or for decoration. This is deeply, deeply important. And the power of the arts can be demonstrated any number of ways, but one of them in the American church, where there's so much controversy over music and musical style. So this has to do with the arts. It has to do with spirituality and hermeneutics and some other things as well, but also very much with the arts. And people are so upset because the music touches people in a very deep part of their being. And really all of art does that. And great art, whether it's performed or created by someone who knows the Lord or someone who doesn't know the Lord, calls upon that which is deeply ingrained in them and placed in them because they're made in the image of God. So it's an extremely important topic as well. When we think about Christian art, well, I think that I would rather say I'm a follower of Christ, I'm a Christian, and I love art, I create art, I collect art, I work with artists, and so my faith just informs everything that I do with art. Some would say that a Christian painting should be like an illustrated gospel tract, and it should have a fish or a cross or an eagle or a John 3:16 on it. Well, if some want to do that, they can do that, but that doesn't make their painting Christian. It's just an expression of how they're feeling at that moment, because God, the greatest artist of all, he creates new sunsets every few seconds all around the world, and none of them have a fish or a cross or a John 3:16 on it. The creations of his imagination don't need symbols. The beauty speaks for itself. This is a very important thing. Many churches see art as utilitarian. If we have an artist, we need a bulletin board. We have an artist, can you do something that is perhaps even kitschy? And then we can talk about it. But to think about how can we as a church maximize the gifts of the artists that we have in the church and even learn from that person about the culture in the city or the community, but how can we help come alongside that artist to create great art that speaks to the soul of the community, thereby opening up the mind so that there can be all sorts of important conversations, including kingdom conversations. The topic of the arts is critical all over the world, in Latvia and in America.
I might just mention, too, for those of you that say, well, I'd like to learn a little bit more about this, one of the books we published here at Point of View is entitled Arts, Media, and Culture. First section deals with culture, how Christians relate to the culture, and how we evaluate the culture from a biblical point of view. The second section deals with the issue of the arts, and it gets into art and the Christian, music and the Christian, film and the Christian, and a variety of others. And then the last section deals with media in terms of entertainment, but also the question of new media, media discernment, and the rest. So it's just a resource that we've made available. And I would say, Charles, as people go to your website, they're going to see that you have a real vision to see artists transformed in that area. And it does seem to me that that's one of those kind of cross-cultural opportunities. So whether people are going to have a ministry with you in Latvia, whether they want to have a ministry to another particular mission field around the world, or even just a mission field across the street, it does seem to me that art is a neglected forum and platform that the church really needs to embrace once again as an outreach to the non-believer, don't you think?
Absolutely. It's not only neglected, it's extremely powerful. And in fact, one apologist in the UK says that art is the new apologetic for Europe, because so many minds are already closed to historic Christianity. Or I have some friends in Texas who just say the folks here are gospel hard. And the minds are closed. So how do you speak to a closed mind? By speaking to the heart. And art has the power, without the words, to speak directly to the place in someone's heart, their soul, their being, that doesn't need words to be touched and to be moved. And in that moment, then a window opens, an aha moment happens, an openness happens, and all of a sudden you're into conversation that you didn't have before. Kerby, I'd like to share with you a strategy that we're doing.
Sure.
That is coming to the U.S. God is really blessing it, and it's extremely interesting. A number of years ago, our artists were dreaming together, what is it that we can do together that none of us could do alone, and we decided it could be exhibition. But not just exhibitions so artists can sell their work, which is noble because artists need to make a living, but an exhibition that would choose a topic that would speak to the soul of the country, but not overtly evangelical, because then the country will just shut us down right away. We have to be wiser than that. So we chose the topic of depression, which is one of the largest maladies in the Baltic countries, well, frankly, in America too, but sure. Latvia has the number 4 suicide rate in Europe, Lithuania number 1. And so we invited 28 artists and musicians to paint something we called their secret double. Now, this is way cool. See, we all have a secret double, and that's the dark side living within us that pulls us to dark places, places that include depression. And when we're pulled down, then it leads to all sorts of unhealthy things, whether it's addictions or poor performance or horrible relationships or even suicide. And so we asked 28 artists to paint their understanding of secret double. Now, these are good artists. And we invited non-Christian artists and Christian artists to do this together because we wanted to have We want to involve the non-Christian artist in a process that will expose them also to ultimate solutions. And so we did this exhibition in Riga, the capital. We started it in September of 17, and we did it in a convention hall, which used to be the head of the center of the Communist Party. Like you mentioned, you've done something in Hungary like that, and 11,000 people went through this exhibition. But here's what happened. When we announced it, and this is the topic, but the purpose is to offer help and hope, and I should talk about that when we come back from the break.
That's what we'll do. We'll take a break and talk about the rest of that exhibition and some of the outreach from that. A lot more to cover. We'll do so right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Gause. The Washington Area Metropolitan Transit Authority, Metro for short, ferries commuters by rail and bus throughout the nation's capital. In addition to commuters, they also carry advertisements. And at Christmas time, those advertisements look very Christmassy. There are Christmas gifts pictured, lots of red and green, and not too few holiday puns designed to persuade you to buy stuff. The Archdiocese of Washington, D.C. also submitted an advertisement. It pictured a few shepherds and sheep under a starry sky with the message, "Find the perfect gift," scrolled artfully across the sky. At the website displayed in the ad, one finds out that the perfect gift is Jesus, quote, "the perfect gift of God's love this Christmas." But Metro rejected the ad. Macy's and other stores plying the Christmas theme were all right, but according to Metro, there are two halves at Christmas, the secular and the religious. Secular ads are okay, but all religious ads are forbidden. Yeah, Metro will take Santa, but not Jesus, 3 French hens, but not the 3 wise men. Even the president's own remarks at the recent national tree lighting could not appear on the side of a Metro bus. But that's not the law. First Liberty is submitting arguments to courts in Washington, D.C., explaining that what Metro is actually doing is called viewpoint discrimination and is a type of hostility towards religion that the First Amendment forbids. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
Hi, I'm Kelly Shackelford, President and Chief Counsel of First Liberty Institute. I hope you enjoyed this episode of First Liberty Briefing. You can learn more amazing stories about how everyday Americans are standing up and saving religious freedom. Just visit firstliberty.org. You'll be inspired, educated, and informed. Visit firstliberty.org right now.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Charles Kelley back with us for a few more minutes as we talk about his ministry, Bridge Builders International. And Charles, you were talking about some of the outreach and a great opportunity to use, again, the artistic community to reach out, not only in Latvia, but even here in the United States.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and just a few more words about our strategy there, and then a few words about how it's working in other countries. Is that in this exhibition that focused on depression, we offered in the gallery 8 evenings of special discussions, panel discussions, where we went deeper. You see, giving people opportunities, especially secular people, to get further help. One evening was depression and suicide. That was the topic. Depression and bipolar, depression in children or youth, or men or unemployment or women or grief or disability or addiction, so on and so forth. And hundreds of people came. And because of this strategy where we look at the depression as a holistic problem, and presenting holistic solutions to it, the Ministry of Health of the nation wanted to get involved. The City Council was actively supportive of it. The ambassador from another country came and endorsed this. And then 3 TV stations, 2 newspapers. It was the front page of the main newspaper in the country. You see, this caught the attention of the secular leadership, and that just blew us away. And so this exhibition now has gone to Tallinn, Estonia, the capital of Estonia, to another city there in Estonia, 2 more cities in Latvia. It's going to the National Library in Vilnius, the capital of Lithuania. And we're scheduled to bring it next year now to Oregon State University in Corvallis, Oregon. We're in deep discussions with Wheaton College, and with other places in the U.S. about this exhibition, where we will also invite local artists to add their work to the Latvian and the Estonian artists, and then present something very relevant and very comprehensive about this topic of depression. We see it as a relevant, creative, and powerful strategy.
Well, again, if people would like to bring something like that to their own community, I know there's a contact point there at bridgebuildersint.com. Of course, people can follow the link that we have there as well. Mm-hmm. So just before we run out of time, we've talked about, of course, Eagles Wings and the summer camp, and we've talked about this outreach to the artist. I thought we might mention something else that I noticed, and that is you have what's called a Baltic Pastoral Institute. And as a fellow pastor, certainly working with pastors and churches is going to be key. And so talk about what you do in that regard. Mm-hmm.
Well, this is about 10 years old, and it's a rather small, but it's a good quality training institute for Latvia's future church planters and pastors. And it's a 3-year program where we have used Latvian teachers and theologians in the areas where we can find the expertise, and then we invite those from abroad who have areas, who have expertise in some other areas. And I organize actually bringing some of these guest teachers and professors to teach at the Pastoral Institute. But the goal is to continually plant new churches. Latvia, like many other little countries or many places in America, the big cities are growing and the little cities are dying. And so many of these churches are really struggling, and so they need new strategies for new life. But in the meantime, we need new little churches very creatively without having to spend $1 million before they turn around on a building. And so we're trying to provide very high-quality training for the head, for the heart, for the hands, and for the feet for these future leaders.
So again, just some great opportunities. Talk about how people can partner with you just before we go, because we have, again, a link to your website, and that would be a great opportunity for people to connect up with you. We also have a link to your Facebook page in case people want to follow that. So we've got a website, Facebook page, link, and all the rest. But for listeners that have said, okay, I want to know a little bit more. I'd like to support this. I'd like to be a mentor. I'd like to be a counselor. I'm an artist. I'd like to bring something to our community. Talk how people can connect up with you.
Well, first, Kerby, thank you for the invitation to be on the show and to share my heart. I deeply appreciate it. Obviously, we always need the financial support for the operating fund, which is of critical importance. But for every one of these special projects I've spoken about, we need people to come alongside us and to undergird us. It's just like William Carey said that he's willing to go down into the well on the end of a rope if there are others who are holding on to the rope. and that's an important way of looking at helping with support. But I do want to say this. I want to issue an invitation to people. We have a trip July 1st through the 12th called Experience Latvia, July 1st through the 12th, where we are inviting people to Latvia, and it's not a mission trip, it's an exposure trip to the culture, to the life, to the history, and to the ministry. It's highly relational, highly informative, and unforgettable. And we would like to invite people from the listening audience to consider coming on a trip that perhaps will transform their mentality for the rest of their lives.
Let me also mention, too, that one of the things I encourage you as a listener to do is to sometimes watch a video, and there's about 15 videos on the website there, but two that we've already talked about. One, Art, the Language of Europe. The other one on the secret double that we've just talked about, and actually a couple of others that relate to some of the other conversation we've had. And you might want to pick out one of those videos and watch it. Some of them only go for about 4 or 5 minutes, and you will find out quite a bit there. And then my admonition to you is to take that video, hit that share button, put it on your Facebook page, maybe put it on a Twitter feed, something like that. And that'll be a way that you can expose some other people to this. And if you are thinking about that trip, again, we have all the information necessary for you to contact Bridge Builders International. It's all at our website, pointofview.net. So, Charles, of course, I've lived in Oregon in the past and went to school at Oregon State along with a number of other universities. So I certainly know where Corvallis is. I know where Philomath is. And most importantly, I appreciate you giving us some time today to talk about this on our national program.
Well, it's been my privilege and honor, Kerby. Thank you very much.
Let's take a break. When we come back, we're going to have in studio with us Jerry Tuma, and we're going to spend some time talking about economics, and in particular talking about your finances. Are we headed towards a bear market? Right now, we've been in a bull market, and we have seen a tremendous amount of economic dynamism that has happened since President Trump has come into office, and even some of this has happened since about a year ago. Some of the tax cuts were implemented, but what does the future hold? So we're going to be talking with Jerry Tuma. He is, of course, a certified financial planner, and he cannot give you specific advice, although you can contact him off air, but we'll give you some general principles and some trends. And if you go to our website, of course, we have a link to his organization, Cornerstone Financial Services, and there is a very well done piece that is the Cornerstone Report, which really sort of raises the question, are we hitting the top of the stock market? What does the future hold? So we're going to spend some time talking about that, since many of you have had some questions about economics. And for those of you that are also listening on the third hour, we'll get into it in a little different way, looking at some of the problems our federal government is facing and what that might mean to your finances as well. So we're going to answer, hopefully, those economic questions. And if you'd like to give us a call, 1-800-351-1212. We'll be right back.
It wasn't long ago, it seemed, every official decision brought religious liberty and our ability to live as faithful Christians into question. Some of us wondered how long it would be before we were literally forced to choose between obeying God or men. That pressure seems to have subsided just a bit, and now is the time not to take a breath, but to work as hard as we can for the future of our nation. Thanks to you, Point of View is doing just that. And our special thanks to those who have become members of Truth Team 360. In football, 22 guys battle it out on the field while 40 or 60,000 watch in the stands, and perhaps hundreds of thousands more watch on television. We need a special few to get out of the seats and into the game. Join today by calling 1-800-347-5151 and ask to join the Truth Team, or visit us online at pointofview.net/team. We really do need you. The nation needs you. 800-347-5151 and pointofview.net/team. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me. We're going to spend some time today talking about economics and finances, especially your finances. A lot of you have had questions. Okay, kind of the stock market's been up and down. I'm getting a little bit like a roller coaster seasick about what's going on here. Wonder what the future might hold. We have a change of leadership on the House of Representatives starting in January. Democrats will control the House of Representatives. Republicans will retain control of the Senate. What does that mean? And, of course, just a number of other issues we want to put on the table. So it just seemed like it was time to bring our good friend Jerry Tuma back in studio. Let me just mention that Jerry Tuma is the founder and president of Cornerstone Financial Services. It's a state-registered investment advisory firm in the Dallas area. And material on this program is really intended for general information only, should not be taken as specific investment, tax, or legal advice. We are going to encourage you to contact him directly so that you can, first of all, get this Cornerstone report we're going to be referring to a couple of times. And if you have specific questions, he'd be glad to answer those off the air. But we'll give you some general looks at that right now. And Jerry, I guess the last time we were together, we spent some time talking about, is the stock market going to top out? Have we reached the top of it? And are we going to move from a bull market to a bear market? Okay, January is just a little bit further away, but we are going to start December on Saturday. So what do you think right now?
Well, Kerby, it's I don't think that the full-blown bear market has started, obviously. The good news is in this correction we've had, and it's been a wild roller coaster this year for sure. You had the big drop in February, March, then you had another one in October, November, and they lasted a long time. Both cases you had what we would call in technical parlance a double bottom, kind of a W-shaped bottom, which is healthy. You know, that's healthy. What I think we're seeing is we're seeing the setup for the real bear. So last time I was on the show, I think you asked me, you know, when would the market top out, did I think? And of course, nobody knows for sure. And I always say I reserve the right to change my opinion later. But I said, well, it could top out anywhere between August of this year and maybe July of next year.
Right.
Now, we may have hit the first top. In other words, tops of markets, and I don't want to get too technical here, but tops of markets typically take time. You know, bottoms, like at the bottom of a bear market, like you had in 2008, those are usually sharp V-shaped bottoms. They bottom and then it come back up, and it's over. The tops are usually choppy, up and down, up and down. They can last a year or longer sometimes. That's kind of what I think we're seeing. The darlings of this market were what we call the FANG stocks: Facebook, Apple, Netflix, Google. They were kind of like the dot-coms of the 2000 era, or the housing market of 2007. They got really overvalued. They've come down quite a bit. They had a, quote, mini bear market. But what happens usually at the top of a cycle like this is you'll have whatever the darlings are that attract all the money toward the tail end of it. So it's kind of what we call the late cycle in the stock market. Those tend to get all the money. So the greed and the get rich quick and all that stuff, and the young people that forgot how the dot-coms ended or forgot how the housing market ended, they're now putting money in and they're chasing this stuff, and it pushes up to astronomical prices. Then they peak, then they come down, and then they try to recover from that, and then it's Katie bar the door on the way down usually after that. So it's no reflection on these companies per se. It's just the fact that this is human behavior, and that's how you measure. You can't, quote, predict the exact time of the market top, but you can learn to recognize when these topping symptoms, if you want to call it that, are happening. And I think we've seen that first top in these tech-oriented stocks My guess would be, generally speaking, a lot of people have talked about, well, is a split Congress, is gridlock going to be good or bad for the market? And people, the first thing you hear from Wall Street is gridlock's good for the market, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, wait a minute, time out. Research firm, bank credit analysts, our best research firm, maybe the best in the world, has said when you have the president and the Congress at odds, usually you get about a 6-month rally, and it's not a huge one. So my thinking right now, and again, always say I reserve the right to change my opinion later, is this is kind of the warning shot across the bow, to use an old World War II kind of thinking. I think the real bear market probably starts next year, in the second half of next year. I'm concerned about oil going back up, even though it's gone down quite a bit. I think that's probably temporary. I think most of that was leveraged, induced, too much borrowed money in that market. I think that the China trade war, although I'm hopeful that Trump will talk a good game, he's going to play tough, and so is Xi Jinping. He's going to, neither one of them's going to back down, I don't think. But I think they're going to try to get some conciliatory sounding language out there. So if it takes 6 months or 18 months for them to come to some kind of agreement, because China's basically been like the mafia as it applies to free market economics. Put a gun to your head, give us your technology, pirating. They're going to have to change some of that behavior, and Trump's not going to back down from that, I don't think. So unlike the deal where he was playing tough with Mexico, we made a deal, I don't think China's going to go away for a while. So the bottom line is I think next year is going to be a rough year for the market and the economy, probably the second half of the year. Usually the first 6 months, usually November to May is typically the best time for the market, typically of the whole year. Again, I'm worried about, even though oil has a temporary oversupply right now, all our research says it's going to be gone by the middle of next year, and then probably oil prices go way back up again. So I think the combination of that, the Federal Reserve, the old saying is don't fight the Fed. When the Fed takes the chairs away and the music's still going and everybody scrambles for the chairs and musical chairs kind of thing, it's a bad effect on the economy, and I think that's going to what probably pushes us into a bear market second half of next year, recession either late next year or in early 2020, probably.
And when people listen to this, they say, okay, why should I trust Jerry Tuma? And of course, we've all said around here, past performance is no guarantee of future success. But let's give you credit where credit is due.
Thank you.
You've picked just about every one of these reversals. I think you missed one out of the last, 3 decades I've known you. So that's been pretty good batting average, right?
Yeah, it is. Thank you. Yeah, the 1987 crash, which I think is when we first met, helping Marlon with his show.
Sure.
Then the 1998 mini meltdown, the 2000 meltdown. Now, we did identify the housing market top, but I didn't know about the subprimes in the system. Yeah. So we didn't fully pre-call, if you will, the 2008 market, but we did take our clients to cash in the second half of the market. So essentially, we don't believe in riding out bear markets. A lot of firms, that's all people are told, is you have to ride every bear market out, lash yourself to the mast and hope it's not a Class 5 hurricane while you're riding this up and down deal. So, and I know it felt a little bit that way the last 2 months, but I just don't think this is the true big bear market. When it hits, it's going to be huge, because I think you've got the old bank robber Willie Sutton in the 1930s asking, why do you rob banks? He said that's because where the money is. It's and the baby boomers are older now. They've had 2 severe bear markets. I don't think most of them are going to opt to ride this one out next time, and I think it'll probably hit again, most likely second half of next year. But I think it could be a gruesome bear when it finally does hit. Now, optimistically, as we talked about in our special report, we're very optimistic about the Trump changes in the economy. I don't see a big crash in the economy like we had in 2008, but I think a bear market that's historic could very well happen. And again, that's probably next year.
Well, let's take a break, and when we come back, we'll talk a little bit more about your philosophy, because in some respects it's more contrarian. When everybody out there in the street saying buy, Jerry's usually saying don't, sell, or put it in a guaranteed principal account or something like that. So we'll talk about some of that philosophy. And, of course, we also do welcome your phone calls. I know some of you are saying, I'm not sure what to do with my 401k, my mutual funds, my stocks, and we can't give you too much specific advice, but it gives you some general understanding about how to make some decisions. So let's take a break. We'll continue our conversation right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
When the internet was growing, we often heard promises that the World Wide Web would usher in a digital utopia. It would connect diverse communities and promote democratic values across the world. Fred Bauer, in a recent article, suggests that the dream of digital equality has become a nightmare. In some ways, social media has fulfilled some of its promises. Every person can have a platform and can theoretically connect with people around the world. You don't have to master some of the complex computer codes that many of us had to learn decades ago. The user-friendly platforms make it possible for just about anyone to build a platform and establish a digital community. But the harsh reality is that these social media platforms have coalesced around a small number of powerful players. These high-tech giants have immense power in determining which voices are heard and which are eliminated. Sometimes it's done by human actions, but often it is accomplished by shifting algorithms that determine who can be heard and who is eliminated. We often hear about the social media mobs that demonstrate a mob mentality towards views and people they dislike. But Fred Bauer explains that many of these movements are not bottom-up affairs. They are social media pressure campaigns harnessed by people who already have significant platforms. They merely pick out targets for their followers to attack and collaborate with others in order to make their message seem larger than it actually may be. His article is a reminder that many of these online battles on social media should not be seen as a reaction from the people, but actually orchestrated campaigns against selected targets. This isn't the internet we were promised a few decades ago, and it's worth understanding how activists are using social media today against many of us. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kerby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
In studio today is Jerry Tuma, certified financial planner, individual that, of course, is the president and founder of Cornerstone Financial Services. And if you would like to know more about some of the things we're talking about, there is what is available on his website, the Cornerstone Report. And you can sign up for that, get that. When you print it out, make sure you have enough paper in the printer, because it will take you a few pieces of paper to print all of that out, and it will be a resource that's available. And we have a link to cornerstonereport.com, so you can just find it right there. So that's the way in which you can find that information, some of which we're quoting from. But I thought before we get into some of the specifics, talk about your philosophy, because you bring a different kind of perspective. You've actually been looking at this in a way that maybe Milton Friedman looks at it, and a number of others. And I've jokingly said you're sort of a contrarian. When a lot of people out there on the street are saying buy, you're saying sell, and vice versa. And so even as people listen to this, they're going, well, my financial planner's not saying that, because you're looking at it in a different way. And I think one of the reasons why you're sort of ahead of the game. But talk about that.
Well, thank you, Kerby. Yeah. So I started it really from a biblical perspective.
Yes.
In a lot of ways. In other words, there are two schools of thought out there. One school of thought is you ride out every storm. So the stock market goes up and down, but over the long run, it tends to go up, which is true. But there's a big but behind that. I don't see that trying to ride out every storm is biblical. First of all, if you look in James chapter 4, and of course, you know, one of my mentors was the great Larry Burkett, who wrote every book you can imagine on Christian finances. James chapter 4 talks about, don't say we're going to go into such and such a city or buy or sell, say if the Lord wills. Don't assume tomorrow. The principle there biblically, and that of course was a very rough paraphrase, But the principle biblically is don't assume the future. Don't put your finances in such a position where you have to have a certain type of outcome to succeed.
Right.
And he applied it to debt, going into debt, which people tend to do at the top of the economic cycle almost infallibly. Most people do. But I also sit there and I said, if you're going to apply that to debt, how do you not apply that to the stock market? Because you don't know what's going to happen. Worst case scenario, and let's hope and pray this never happens. Most people think something like this could happen someday. What happens if a terrorist gets a hold of a dirty bomb or something in an American city? 9/11 was pretty rough on the market, but it was a small attack. And again, I don't want to be a gloom and doomer. That's not the whole point. I'm a long-term optimist. But that's assuming the future. In other words, you don't know for sure what's going to happen tomorrow. Matthew chapter 24, I believe, or 25, talks about trading with the talents, the parable of the talents. They traded. So and again, I was mentored this way. I wasn't mentored to buy and ride out every storm. So again, in the long run, and this affects people especially as they age. If you get over 50, you get 60, 65, and on, I just don't think you should be riding out all the bear markets. Why? Right. I think it's unnecessary. First of all, it's pain that you can do without. There's no reason to. And I can't say that we've perfectly identified every market. And it's not about trying to pinpoint precision, predict it, if you will. And this is kind of a life work, if you want to call it that, for me, and that is, but recognizing the symptoms. What are the things that happen typically at the top of the market cycle? Now, the really big firms, they have so much money under management, they can't tell people to get out of the market. If they did, one of the biggest firms on Wall Street has 14,000 stockbrokers. So if they said sell tomorrow, the stock market doesn't exist the next day. It would crash all the way to zero. So they can't. So because they're so big and they have so much money, they say you got to ride through every storm, and there's no other alternative.
And you
to that.
can understand why they say that, but that doesn't help you as the individual investor.
Exactly.
Especially if you're near retirement, right?
Especially if you're older. And so the issue here is a 50% drop in the market, which we've had 2 of those since 2000, means you need 100% gain to make your money back, not counting the anxiety, the pain, the fear, What happens if you lose your job in the middle of that? What happens if you're living on that for retirement? I just think it's a painful way to do it. It's unnecessary. So what we do at Cornerstone, we don't ride out bear markets. There are ways to make money in bear markets, which is more complicated than we can get on today's show. But the bottom line is you can make profits in a bear market without taking excessive risk. If you want to know how to do that, you're going to have to call our office. But the bottom line is, I don't believe, and this is why we prepared this special report called Preparing for the Top, Part 1. Part 2 kind of got delayed. I had some personal events. My father passed away and some other things. But the bottom line is, I think that we're preparing for the top still. I think we've had the first NASDAQ-type top in August. I don't know that we're going to get back to the old highs with, let's say, Facebook and those companies. But you never know. The trend is your friend is another frequently quoted Wall Streetism. And the issue is the trend, I think, is getting ready to go back up, but I think it's probably going to be short-lived because by the second half of next year, the Fed will continue, even though William Powell has backed off a little bit, the head of the Fed. He backed off, thankfully. In the short run, he said, well, we'll take it a little easier from here. He made a real hard statement about interest rates going up higher in September that sort of started all these dominoes, really, is how the whole thing got started. At this point, though, I think we're going to have globally a recession. U.S., I think, will be very mild economically. But again, that doesn't mean that the stock market, bear market, will be mild. In 2000, 2001, 2002, we had a very mild economic downturn. It barely qualified, quote unquote, as a recession. 2 consecutive quarters where the economy goes down. All right. But we had a 50% bear market. Those are not the same.
So the stock market and the economy are different. Yeah. And you're still saying the economy's in pretty good shape because of the tax cuts.
The tax cuts are great.
And for all the conversation about next year, the now newly elected again Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, saying that we're going to remove the Republican tax cuts. They're not going to be able to get to
do that.
Yeah, that won't happen.
It's not going to happen.
That won't happen. So
the deregulation
So the
is
economy
huge.
may be good, but the stock market may not, which is why some of our listeners might say, maybe I don't want to stay in the stock market, right?
Yeah, exactly. So I think the economy will stay relatively strong. It'll have a mild downturn, probably not a big one. I don't see anything in the whole system that could blow the whole world up like we had in 2008. But again, I have to wonder, again, I think I've quoted Willie Sutton, the bank robber, why do you rob banks? Because that's where the money is. if you think about the baby boomers, because that's where most of the money is. Most of the people that are over 60, 65 and older, that's where the bulk of the money is that is in the stock market for those individual investors. They rode out a 50% bear market in 2000. They said, oh, wow, that was terrible, but hopefully it'll never happen again. Then they rode out one that was worse in 2008.
Yes.
Are they going to go for number 3? Are they going to say, hey, I think this is so much fun, I want to run out this bear market again. Give me a hammer. I'm going to hit my thumb 50 times. Let's do it. No, they're going to go, hey, I've done this before. I don't want to do it again. And I think when the bear market starts next time, you're going to have them bailing out in massive quantities. And that's why I think it's going to be a very severe bear market. So even though I'm very optimistic about all the changes, the tax cuts, the deregulation, everything Trump's been doing with the economy, I would give an A+ to, although I don't always agree with the statements. The bottom line is what he does is working, and it's working extremely well. And it has the potential to pay dividends literally for decades if we don't let the far left get back in there and take it all away. But the bottom line is the changes are incredible for the long run. But that does not mean that you won't have a business cycle. You still have expansions and contractions. You still have bull and bear markets. It ebbs and flows. You have summers. You have winters. It's cyclical just like everything else. I think we're probably going to have a severe bear market probably starting the second half of next year. It could be another 50%er. We just don't know. But the bottom line is unless you really enjoy pain, I don't think you necessarily have to ride it out. That's why we're encouraging people get our special report and get prepared. It's called Preparing for the Top.
Let me just again mention that we have that link to a Cornerstone, and you can find that on our website, pointofview.net. Let me open up the phones, too, 1-800-351-1212. Perhaps you have some questions, and I think already you've answered a few that I know people have had, and that is, should I think about getting out of the stock market? And why is it that I'm hearing people say, no, you just need to stay in the market? Well, you just explained that. You know, some of these firms, if they said everybody get out of the market, what are they going to do? You know, it would affect the stock market. It would affect those individuals that are making some kind of residuals from that. And so you've answered that question. I did want to get into the whole issue of energy, too, because that, I think, is interesting. You mentioned just in passing that we have an oversupply of energy right now. So that suggests that obviously gas prices and others will be low. But that's because of the Saudis and the Iranians, and I want to get into that in just a minute. But also, I want to take some phone calls. So if you'd like to join us, that number is 1-800-351-1212. We have in studio with us today Jerry Tuma. We'll come back and talk about energy. We'll take a few phone calls. So if you have some comments or questions, maybe you're saying, okay, I'm thinking about selling my house or buying my house or buying stock, or I've got a mutual fund or a 401k, or what are some things that I might begin to think about? Again, we've given you a link to the Cornerstone Report. You can just simply go to cornerstorereport.com, find that, and that'll give you some information as well. But, of course, they can also call you because I suspect everybody's got an individualized situation, don't they? So
they do.
Age is different.
Everybody's different, and that's one reason you can't give generalized advice over the radio. Our number is 800-327-4285, 800-327-4285.
And again, we have our number to call on the air, which is a little bit different, 800-351-1212. We got some phone calls coming in, but there will probably be room for you. Call now. What happens is all the lines fill up at the end, and then some of you don't get through. So if you have some questions, call now. We'll get to those calls right after this.
Is religious freedom still a cornerstone of the republic, or has it effectively been crushed by the forces of tolerance? America needs Christians to be informed and as unified as possible, applying God's wisdom to civic life. Point of View can be a key part of a successful mission. I believe in America. I believe God wants His best for us. We can face whatever the world throws at us as long as we stand together. If you have not signed on, please do it now. Support Point of View Radio today at pointofview.net. Set up your monthly gift by clicking the Truth Team 360 picture and then carefully follow the directions. Pointofview.net. By phone, you can give at 1-800-347-5151. 800-347-5151. Or mail that first donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Box 30, Dallas 75221. Or call us 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Talking about the economy and your finances, and if you'd like to join us, that number is 1-800-351-1212. Privileged to have in studio with us Jerry Tuma, again, a certified financial planner, president and founder of Cornerstone Financial Services. And again, we can't give you necessarily specific advice, but give you some general principles that you can apply. And if you'd like to contact him or his staff afterwards, you can do that as well. Let's head out to California, KYCC. Elsie, I appreciate you giving us a call. What are your questions for us today?
Hi, good morning. I appreciate your show, and I've been listening for a while. I was calling because I needed some help with understanding a 401k mutual fund account my husband has. He's no longer working because he's disabled, and he still has the account with his employer. And also with the times right now, I get kind of nervous. He has a substantial amount in that fund, so we're just kind of wanting to find out what to do.
Okay. Now, Elsie, again, I can't legally give advice over the radio,
absolutely.
But I can give you some ideas. Now, give me your age if you don't mind. Or your
my husband's 57 years old.
57, and he's disabled.
I'm 50, so I'm still working.
Okay. Here's a couple things to think about. I would, first of all, recommend you get a copy of our newsletter. Go to our website, or I'll put it this way. Our website is cornerstonereport.com. There's a special report on there that you can download, you can print, you can just read it online however you would like to. The issue with, if you're in the market, I'm assuming, are you in the market on the 401k? Then there's mutual funds in the stock market. Okay.
Yes, and they're at the high risk currently, so that's why he has a really nice account right now.
Okay. All right. Well, that's a good thing. Here's what I would consider. I'll just give you some pointers to think about. There's, again, as I mentioned in the early part of the show, a lot of the firms out there, and especially the bigger firms, they can't give you what's called a sell signal. They can't say, don't get in stocks. They always say, ride it out forever. The problem is if you go through severe declines and you're older and, or in your case, your husband's disabled, that can be devastating. Now, are you living off of that money, or you're primarily living off of your salary?
Off of my salary.
Okay. That's a good thing. So what you have to make a decision on, and I would quote the book of James again here. James chapter 1 talks about, if a man lacks wisdom, or a woman obviously, let him ask of God, who gives liberally and upbraideth not. This, again, King James paraphrase here. But he promises to give us the wisdom that we need. The condition is that we believe in faith that he will give us wisdom. So what you could do is you could read our website, read the material on the special report. Again, our philosophy is we do not ride out bear markets. Why? Because it's too hard to make the money back. I still remember, Kerby, when we were on Wall Street during the crash of 2008.
I do remember.
There was a guy that just flat out had a heart attack right there and croaked. And my wife, we're over there real close to them. She said, he's gone. They're not getting him back. I mean, people do die from stress and this kind of stuff. So, and again, I'm not trying to over dramatize it. I'm trying to say, to me, there's a time, Ecclesiastes talks about a time to laugh, a time to cry, time to plant, time to harvest. So my view of the market is there's a time to harvest. I don't think the bear market has started yet. I do believe most likely, and again, I reserve the right to change my opinion, the bear market probably starting next year, in the second half of next year. Globally, there's a lot of problems economically. There's a lot of great things about American economy. And historically speaking, again, the market has always come back. But the question you have to ask yourself is, if we have another 50% drop, am I willing to ride that one out? A little older now, with husband disabled. I don't know. That's a decision you're going to have to make. That's why I said James chapter 1. Feel free to call us if you would like. Our number again is 800-327-4285. But I'm a little concerned about it. I'm having to dance around in my answers here because of regulatory issues. But the bottom line is, I think there's going to be another severe bear market in the next 2 years, probably starting in the second half of next year. And you just have to make the decision, but make an informed decision if you want to ride that out or not. If your husband is not employed anymore, you have the option of doing what's called a 401k rollover into a rollover IRA that becomes self-directed. You can figure it out. You could have another firm like ourselves direct it for you. There are a lot of options. It does not have to stay with the old employer, and I don't see really a reason why you'd want to keep it there if he's not planning on going back to that employer.
Yeah.
So anyway, I hope this has been helpful. I've kind of given you as much insight and hints as I can with the regulatory stuff, but hopefully that helps some, Elsie.
Let's see if we can talk about energy for just a minute, because you did say about the oversupply, and this is a good example of some of the things we talk about here on Point of View impinge upon this. You know, we've talked about whether or not we were going to get oil supplies from Iran. We've talked about the relationship between this President Donald Trump, and Saudi Arabia. And all that affects some of the questions that are going to relate to whether or not I want to be in energy stocks and what the price of gasoline is going to be this time next year.
Yeah. And it also impacts the inflation outlook. So here's kind of the short and long-term view on oil. In the first place, electric cars are not going to replace gasoline anytime soon. That is multiple decades out. The most
look at General Motors.
I know.
Yeah,
that's right.
All these people losing their jobs.
I want to say the most egregious projection by Bloomberg says that there's 30% of the cars are electric cars by 2040, but there's still more gasoline cars on the road then than there are now because of expansion in all these emerging markets like China and India and so forth.
Right.
So oil is going to be the predominant hydrocarbon for the foreseeable future, the next 10 or 15 years.
Very true.
I think in the short run, there was a little bit of an oversupply, not a lot. Some of that big drop in oil prices was too much borrowed money, too much leverage in the futures market. That, again, is another whole topic. But in the long run, what's happened is since the crash of oil in 2014, most people don't understand, Kirby, roughly 50% of all the oil that supplies the world, and we're up to about 100 million barrels of demand a day.
Mm-hmm.
So right now we have a temporary oversupply that's maybe 1% of that. That's not a big deal.
Nope.
1 million oversupply on 100 million in demand is not a huge deal. It temporarily upset the oil market, but the oil market's running scared from all of the reverb that it's had in the last 2 or 3 years. The bottom line, though, is if you project a little bit further, the Chinese have gone from buying, I think they had 57 cars per 1,000 people in 2011. Now they're at 250 cars per 1,000 people in 2015.
Yes.
And in 10 years, they're going to be at 450 cars per 1,000 people. And you got 1.3 billion people. When the Chinese, and this happens in society, this is a behavioral thing. When people make middle class status, wherever they are, which is different status, it's a different level of financial, of money in America versus China. But when they get to middle class status for their society, the first thing they want to do is buy a car.
Yes.
And so you're going to have another 200 or 300 million cars being bought by the Chinese in the not too distant future. The demand for oil long term is going straight through the roof because,
right.
And they're building this gigantic infrastructure project called One Belt, One Road that goes all the way from China throughout Eastern Asia, all the way to Moscow, all the way to Germany, all the way through there. Monstrous build out of infrastructures, highways, ports, dams, you name it. Everything. It's going to go crazy. So they're talking $8 trillion of infrastructure coming. That means more buying cars, more gasoline. So in the short run, it's a little soft. When we have another recession, it'll be a little soft again. But in the long run, I would be surprised, Kirby, if we don't have a couple of shocks like the 70s. You remember the gasoline lines? We had to stand there. So gasoline went from, believe it or not, folks, this ages us here, dates us 19 cents a gallon to 33 cents a gallon, then to $1 a gallon in 1 decade. Because oil went from $2.50 a barrel to $41 a barrel. We had 2 crises. I think the next decade we're going to have a lot of that. Because, again, when the oil price went down so low, the big offshore programs virtually shut down. So the Permian Basin in West Texas is pumping more out than ever before with all the advanced technology and shale and drilling and all that.
Fracking, yeah.
But Brazil is the Saudi Arabia of the world on offshore in the ocean, in the Atlantic Ocean. And essentially, they've gone from 51 of these monster drilling rigs that drill, one of them 25,000 feet deep, from 51 rigs to 10. And that's happened across the whole world, and that's 50% of the world's oil supply. So given the requisite lag time, this is probably a longer answer than you wanted, 4 to 7 year lag time on these monster wells, the near distant, not too distant future, early 2020s, I think we're probably going to have another energy crisis.
Pretty amazing. And, of course, not much oil coming out of Venezuela right now. Of course, that's socialism,
crashing,
isn't it?
And, yes.
One of your my favorite
topics. We know
topics.
that socialism is the best economic system, don't you know, Kirby? So.
He is saying this, of course, with tongue well placed in cheek.
That's right.
We're going to get some more phone calls here, but let's take a break. And let me just mention again, if you just happen to join us, we have Jerry Tuma with us for a little bit longer here talking about economics and finances and those kinds of issues. And so I did want to give you that opportunity to ask a question. 1-800-351-1212. Of course, we have a link to Cornerstone Financial Services and, again, the Cornerstone Report, which will give you some information. And if you want to talk to someone off air, I think you can give very specific information given individuals that vary in terms of age and their particular needs and their financial circumstances and so many other things. We certainly wanted you to have some answers to many of the questions that many of you have been asking. So that's why we're doing this today. We will continue our conversation with Jerry Tuma and some more phone calls right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Gause. The Washington Area Metropolitan Transit Authority, Metro for short, ferries commuters by rail and bus throughout the nation's capital. In addition to commuters, they also carry advertisements. And at Christmas time, those advertisements look very Christmassy. There are Christmas gifts pictured, lots of red and green, and not too few holiday puns designed to persuade you to buy stuff. The Archdiocese of Washington, D.C. also submitted an advertisement. It pictured a few shepherds and sheep under a starry sky with the message, "Find the perfect gift," scrolled artfully across the sky. At the website displayed in the ad, one finds out that the perfect gift is Jesus, quote, "the perfect gift of God's love this Christmas." But Metro rejected the ad. Macy's and other stores plying the Christmas theme were all right, but according to Metro, there are two halves at Christmas, the secular and the religious. Secular ads are okay, but all religious ads are forbidden. Yeah, Metro will take Santa, but not Jesus, 3 French hens, but not the 3 wise men. Even the president's own remarks at the recent national tree lighting could not appear on the side of a Metro bus. But that's not the law. First Liberty is submitting arguments to courts in Washington, D.C., explaining that what Metro is actually doing is called viewpoint discrimination and is a type of hostility towards religion that the First Amendment forbids. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
Hi, I'm Kelly Shackelford, President and Chief Counsel of First Liberty Institute. I hope you enjoyed this episode of First Liberty Briefing. You can learn more amazing stories about how everyday Americans are standing up and saving religious freedom. Just visit firstliberty.org. You'll be inspired, educated, and informed. Visit firstliberty.org right now.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes. We have Jerry Tuma with us, Cornerstone Financial. Let's take as many calls as we can here. We'll head up to Corpus Christi, Texas. And Carl, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View. What would you like to ask?
How you doing again, Kerby?
I am good, and I'm glad to hear from you. What would you like to put on the table here?
I hear all this talk about the stock market, and I'm a deep studier of Scripture. I see dark days, and not just American history, but like globally happening. But we as believers are not to be dismayed by these signs that are occurring, but have hope, because soon we'll be taken off the planet. The rapture will be taken off to be with God while these things take place on the earth. You know what I'm saying? And I mean, there's a lot of things taking place globally. Donald Trump is being considered as like Cyrus, who rebuilt the temple after Nebuchadnezzar destroyed it. And there's a lot of global things happening on like such a high scale. Like the United States government is in so much debt. A lot of people are unaware that a lot of the people of the United States have become collateral because the debt has reached such a high toll.
Okay, let's get into that, because that was one of the other things that we were going to get into, and that is we've gone from, $7 trillion national debt under President Bush to $21 trillion today. And we'll get into a little bit more of that next hour. But what about that? That's a question that people are starting to have. The global economy is not doing well, and the federal government, somewhere along the line, is just going to run out of money, isn't it?
Well, Kirby, it's a big problem, and this has been building. It really got the seeds, if you will, under FDR when they started all the social programs, which always start out great and many times accomplish great things for society. Sometimes they have unintended consequences and run amok. But like Milton Friedman once said, there's no such thing as a temporary government program. So the politicians what do? Well, we go make laws, but we also give away stuff. So they like giving away benefits from the government. The problem is a guy I'm sure you're familiar with his quote, Andrew Tytler Frazier, which we talked about in our book From Boom to Bust and Beyond, said once a populace basically figures out they can vote themselves benefits out of the Treasury, then a democracy collapses because of loose fiscal policy. Now, that sounds like the playbook for where we're headed if we're not careful with this thing, which is, again, one of the things with Trump coming on board, the first thing he had to do is fix the economy. First things first. Tackling the entitlement programs is suicidal. Trying to say Medicare, Social Security, all of the other giveaway programs. I don't remember how many mandatory, it seems like there's like 35 or 40 mandatory government programs now. The spending's running amok. As we were talking about before the show, during the break, the corporate or the income tax revenue that the federal government's getting this year is record. The tax cuts have stimulated the economy. That generates more taxable income. When you stimulate the economy, more people have jobs, more corporations pay more taxes because they're earning more profits. Even though they got a tax cut, quote unquote, a lot of that money went through to the workers and benefits and so forth. That, again, is a whole nother show. But the bottom line is the problem is not the amount of revenue that the government's getting, it's how much they're spending. So they're think of it this way, $4.5 trillion approximately in spending, $3.5 trillion in tax revenues. Again, the issue, though, is not cutting the tax rates. That stimulates the economy. It's a good thing. The problem is that the federal government's spending is like a runaway freight train going down the mountain with no brakes.
Yeah.
And it's getting worse. On top of all that, and then, again, I'm not trying to be gloomy. I'm an optimist by nature, but you got to face reality. One of our books that we love, Good to Great, talks about being unwavering in your dealing with your current reality. Brutally honest in the assessment of your current reality, having unwavering faith, you prevail in the end. And we've gone from George Washington, the Revolutionary War, to George W. Bush and all the wars in between to accumulate $7 trillion. Now we're at $21 trillion, and 50 million baby boomers have yet to enter Medicare, which, of course, has no money in it. It's already gone. So I believe that the next decade we're going to experience something we haven't seen in a long time, since the 70s, hyperinflation, high inflation decade. Printing money is going to happen in ways like we've never seen.
Let's take at least one more phone call. And in California, Jim, I think you have some questions for Jerry Tuma. So, Jim, go ahead.
Oh, yes. Hi. Thank you for taking my call. And I have a question. When we get up in age, I'm 65, and I was wanting to move my money into more safe products. And one of them is like a fixed index annuity where you get market-like returns, or at least get some returns with safety of principal. And I was just wondering what you may have talked about. I just got on the phone call or the.
That's okay. Yeah.
Radio
And the question you're asking is
but
most of our callers, especially today, and if I took some of the other calls, they're in the older category, and they're saying, how do I reduce risk? Really? Good question.
Yep. Okay. Again, as an investment advisor, a registered investment advisor, I look at investments as tools. I don't marry any one of the products, kind of like an old car dealer I heard once say, I ain't married to none of them, So we use these for some people in some situations. An index annuity essentially means that you have no downside. If the market crashes and you have another bear, you're not losing money. When it goes back up, basically you'll make a certain amount. There's a cap rate. And again, I'm not going to go into the details. We don't have enough time. But the bottom line is I would say you're going to average 3 or 4% a year probably over the long run. So you're giving up upside in other areas. I think real estate's going to do extremely well in the next decade. Now, be careful where you're at in the country by saying that. I'm talking about nationwide, or the real estate investments, if you will. But at the same time, these are also very long-term products. They typically are 10-year minimum holds. So you have to be careful how those work. I can't endorse it. I can't say that it's bad. I say there's pros and cons to how it's done. I like other ways to do things better for the person in your situation, but we do use those occasionally for the right person. So that's basically all I can tell you on the radio about that product. But it's, again, you're giving up most of the upside of your return, a lot of return upside in protection for you're not going down in value. And that's kind of how those things work.
But again, I'm getting the sense that at least some of our listeners are older and they're saying, I don't want a lot of risk. If I'm 20 something, okay, I'll take some risk, because I got a long time to build up what might be retirement or whatever, or even college for my kids. But if I'm 60 something, and a couple of our callers are in that category, 50 something, 60 something, risk is an issue to pay attention to.
Right.
And when you are telling us that it's possible, it's probably likely, is probably a better word to use it, that we're headed towards a bear market that could be a really bad bear market, then I think some people are going to want to make some decisions. So if they want to talk to you off air, is that a possibility? And get a little more detailed advice?
Our phone number is 800-327-4285. Again, that's 800-327-4285.
And of course, we have a link to Cornerstone, and I just appreciate you giving us just a perspective, because this is something we will maybe deal with a little bit more in the next hour or two in terms of that, and then I'll get back into some of the issues in the news. But once we think about these ideas, we then need to seek wisdom, as you mentioned, and certainly we need to ask God for wisdom. There's also wisdom in a multitude of counselors, so that's something else. To just don't make rash decisions. That's the worst kind of way to deal with your finances, right?
Panicky decisions, either based on fear or based on greed. Either of those two extremes are almost always bad ones. And what you want to do is you want to assess this current environment if you're in the market at all, especially if you're older. You want to assess it while things are rational before they get crazy, emotional, panicking, because then is the wrong time to be making that decision. You want to make that decision ahead of time.
Yeah. Again, when it's the crowd or the mob, it's not a good time to be following either of those. No. They may not be thinking rationally.
Don't be like the lemmings that go over the hill and cliff the next time and drown in the ocean.
Well, Jerry, thank you for being with us today. Again, we'll do it again, but I just know people had some economic questions. I think you were able to answer some of those, and others they can answer off air. So we're going to take a break. We'll come back and continue some of our conversation on a couple of issues in the news. All that coming up right after this.
There is no more dangerous time than when things are going well. Remember Elijah on Mount Carmel? Fire came down. There was no doubt who was God, but what happened next? He went from amazing faith to a time of great fear and depression. Many Christians have been very thankful a certain Democratic candidate for president was not the one to nominate two replacements for the Supreme Court. But as with Elijah, times of great victory are also times of great danger. Moments like this are not the time to take it easy. This is not the time to let our guard down. This is a time to double down on our work in the community, to serve and pray and plan and invest in a better future. This is the time to join Point of View's Truth Team 360 to make sure today's promising gains are not lost tomorrow. Show your commitment to our future by visiting pointofview.net/team or call 800-347-5151. Ask to join the Truth Team. Pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. Each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
This hour, we're going to continue some of our conversation about economics and finances, in particular, even the last comment about the rather dramatic increase in the national debt from about $7 trillion, getting to where, of course, President George W. Bush was, to $21 trillion. And, of course, that's just the on-record debt, so we're going to get into that issue. We've mentioned some things about the Federal Reserve and a number of others, so we thought it would be very good this hour, for at least a half an hour, to have Andrew Gause on. He's been on the program with us before. He's really one of the foremost experts on the American monetary system and the history of U.S. currency. If you go to his website, we have a link there as well. We'll talk more about that in just a minute. Author of the book, The Secret World of Money, as well as Uncle Sam Cooks the Books, and as a producer of a documentary that we'll be talking about. Andrew, welcome back to Point of View.
Oh, thank you, Kerby. Pleasure to be here.
Let's, if we can, talk about, first of all, the issue of debt, because I just mentioned debt of $21 trillion, but add to that tens of millions of baby boomers haven't even been drawing on Medicare yet. So in some respects, those numbers, which seem so overwhelming, are really pale in comparison to the real indebtedness of the United States. True?
That's a good point, Kerby. In fact, when I wrote Uncle Sam Cooks the Books in 2002, that was one of the reasons that I did that, because even though we were declaring debt at a figure then, and I think you're right on, it's about $7 trillion then, we were not including any of the off-the-books
right.
Spending and or potential or contingent liabilities. And one that you mentioned there, very important, the baby boomers. So you got 70 million, 77 million baby boomers retired collecting on Social Security, and the money's just not there. The Congress has already borrowed it all and spent it on something else. So it's a terrible fact that the stated national debt, what they call the bonded national debt, only covers bills that we've already paid. According to Professor Lawrence Kolikoff at Boston University, there's another $70 trillion in unfunded or undeclared liabilities. So that's a startling figure when they're telling us 21. By the way, there's a little rounding error there. It's 21.73, another $730 billion. And this year, we're anticipating a $1.35 trillion budget deficit, in which we're borrowing $350 billion just to pay the interest.
That's right.
On what we've already bonded. So it is, I don't know, it causes me to worry for the future, for our children and our grandchildren. Maybe we're not going to suffer as much, but they most certainly will.
And I'm really concerned about that as well, because I have children and grandchildren, and I look at this and recognize that there is going to come a time where meeting our financial obligations is going to be more and more difficult. And it isn't for the lack of income, as I have in a commentary that comes out on Monday, and we've already sort of mentioned ahead of time on the program, that October, which is the first month in our new kind of federal fiscal year, there was a record number of dollars coming into the federal treasury. Matter of fact, $11 billion more than they expected. And that record is better than the previous October, which was a record over the previous one. So it isn't a revenue problem, it's a spending problem. Now, does anybody seriously think, Andrew, that the incoming, now presumptive Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, who was just elected, going to do anything about that? No. And that isn't really something I've heard President Donald Trump talk about very much. So it just seems like we'll be spending more and more and eventually put our children and grandchildren in a very difficult set of circumstances.
Well, that is right on. But, if you look at, in October, President Trump called on his cabinet secretaries and said, hey, I want you to cut your budget by 5%. And then looking at his own executive budget in the White House, I mean, look at how much he's spending on people in the White House. So he's doing everything he can, but goodness, what Congress is going to say, we got $11 billion in more than we expected. Great. Let's figure out how to spend that $11 billion. Instead of just paying some principal on the national debt, I'm sure that they're going to find another $11 billion in new spending.
I'm sure they are as well. So let's talk about this, because I will, by the way, when we come back from the break, take some phone calls, 1-800-351-1212. We've already got one call waiting. And I think some people are saying, all right, it doesn't look good for the future. What do I begin to consider as alternatives? Because indeed, if I'm depending upon the federal government for any kind of payment, it's going to come right now, but there may be a time sometime in the future, which may not necessarily affect me in the next year of 2019, but somewhere along the line is going to be a problem. What would you recommend for individuals that are wise stewards of their financial resources?
Oh, most certainly I have something for that. In fact, you know what? I have 3 audio CDs that will explain what to do there. They're half-hour audio CDs, and Kerby, I'll offer them free to Point of View listeners after the break.
Well, that sounds like a great idea. So let's, if we can, take some phone calls along the way. So we'll go to the state of Texas, KBJS. Joyce, I think you have the first question of the hour. So what would you like to ask?
Well, first of all, I cannot participate in the stock market, and I would like to know what I can do with my money besides put it in the credit union and draw just a little bit of interest. I know interest rates have gone up a little bit, but are there other avenues that I could take other than just putting it in a CD?
Any thoughts,
Absolutely.
Andrew?
That's part of the CD package that I'll be giving you. One of them is entitled Protecting Your Wealth. So get a pen handy, and after the break, we'll be sure to give you that.
So again, let's take a break, and if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. We also have a link to your website. It's Andy Gause, and you don't even have to know how to spell it because we have it there. So again, you can find out a little bit more about some of the material that he has available. And I might just, again, indicate that he is an expert on the American monetary system and also the history of the U.S. currency. Also want to talk about the Federal Reserve because that's a whole issue that affects your investments as well. So we'll give you a chance to learn a little bit more about that, and we have all of that available at our website, pointofview.net. Don't forget also that we also provide some other books and resources that might be helpful to you. One of those, which I published about a year or two ago, Christians and Economics, in which it was really an attempt to help you kind of think about some of the Christian principles about this and economic systems. Of course, our most recent booklet is on the whole subject of capitalism and socialism, since we've had a number of people that have been more recently elected to Congress that are actually promoting socialism. It's not that there wasn't an interest in promoting socialist ideas, but in the past, everybody sort of hid their agenda. Now, I guess the sense is as well, we are sort of already made our case, so we're just going to simply be more bold than ever before about the fact that we want to move the U.S. economy into a socialist economy. So if you have any comments, we certainly would welcome your phone calls. 1-800-351-1212. Andrew Gause with us. We'll take a break. He'll give you some information about some of the CDs he's making available, and then we'll see if we can answer a couple of your questions. All that coming up right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
When the internet was growing, we often heard promises that the World Wide Web would usher in a digital utopia. It would connect diverse communities and promote democratic values across the world. Fred Bauer, in a recent article, suggests that the dream of digital equality has become a nightmare. In some ways, social media has fulfilled some of its promises. Every person can have a platform and can theoretically connect with people around the world. You don't have to master some of the complex computer codes that many of us had to learn decades ago. The user-friendly platforms make it possible for just about anyone to build a platform and establish a digital community. But the harsh reality is that these social media platforms have coalesced around a small number of powerful players. These high-tech giants have immense power in determining which voices are heard and which are eliminated. Sometimes it's done by human actions, but often it is accomplished by shifting algorithms that determine who can be heard and who is eliminated. We often hear about the social media mobs that demonstrate a mob mentality towards views and people they dislike. But Fred Bauer explains that many of these movements are not bottom-up affairs. They are social media pressure campaigns harnessed by people who already have significant platforms. They merely pick out targets for their followers to attack and collaborate with others in order to make their message seem larger than it actually may be. His article is a reminder that many of these online battles on social media should not be seen as a reaction from the people, but actually orchestrated campaigns against selected targets. This isn't the internet we were promised a few decades ago, and it's worth understanding how activists are using social media today against many of us. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kerby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Continue our conversation about economics and finances. And last hour, we spent a little bit of time talking about some of your investments. Now we're also focusing on the fact that we have America really drowning in debt at the same time when the economy is doing very well. And what does that mean in terms of our investments and our savings? And Joyce asked a very good question, Andrew, about the whole issue of savings. She's not in the stock market, but she's wondering, okay, how can I protect my savings given the fact that there are some ominous clouds on the horizon? What would you suggest?
Oh, anything but stocks. I'll tell you, they are really scary right now. Unless you know and can pick which stocks are good and which are bad, you really can't tell them apart. That's the problem. So the Constitution provided us with a method of savings that I believe will protect your wealth against any sort of a cataclysm or an environment. And that is, if you read Article 1, it's no state shall make anything but gold and silver coin a tender in payment of debt. So, you know, Grandpa gave me an old silver dollar when I was 8 years old, and I saved it all this time. And I'm shocked at what it's worth today. In fact, silver dollars that I was buying for $8 just 10 years ago are now $38. So it is it's a great place to store your wealth, but you must have a safe and secure place to keep it. Unlike a bank account or a stock account, you're responsible for the storage of your silver dollars or your old $20 gold pieces or old $10 gold pieces. So to me, that's the perfect place to put a portion of your savings. With 10 to 15% of your wealth and gold and silver coins, you could protect yourself against any sort of cataclysm. And I think that's why our founders gave us that option. And we're very specific about it. They understood paper money and what it could do to an economy. And we've gone from paper money to electronic money, Kirby. It's 96% of everything we call money now is just a blip in a computer screen. So any kind of a pulse or any kind of a loss of information means you lose your money. So this is not something that I think we should have to stand as a nation. If you just put away your old silver dollars, put away your old gold coins, stick them in a box and watch that box, I think that's the perfect method of savings. I mean, even over the last 2 decades, you probably averaged about 12% per year on gold and silver coin. Now, granted, if you bought after everyone was aware that there was a problem, like in 2011, after the housing crisis, gold was up to $1,900 then, and now it's $1,250 thereabouts. So, sure, if you wait till after the cat's out of the house, so to speak, you might pay too much. So, dollar average in, save your money in silver coin or in gold coin, and I think over the long term you'll do much better than you would in a bank.
I might also mention that as you go to your website, you even explain about how money comes into existence, and that's something we just sort of take it for granted, and people say, well, how much are these dollar bills worth? Actually, nothing unless somebody wants to take them from you. And you start realizing how that all of this system is on a foundation, but it isn't really a very secure foundation. But let's take some phone calls because I've got all sorts of people with questions or comments. So we'll go to Georgia. Gary, what would you like to add to our conversation today?
Yeah, the Medicaid, when you get, you get Part A first, and when you get Part B, they start taking $134 out of your Social Security check. But also, when you start with the Social Security check, they keep the first month of it before you start getting it. And that I never did understand either.
Okay, so Social Security and Medicare. Any thoughts, Andrew?
Well, simply that they're broke. I mean, the Social Security Trust Fund actually has $3 trillion in it off the books, meaning the government has borrowed that money and put IOUs in the box. And so the only way that they can pay the Social Security recipients today is to cash in an IOU every month. So just looking at the situation from afar, you can see that there's going to be a point very soon when they're going to have to borrow money just to pay Social Security.
Yes.
I don't know how long they're going to be willing to do that. So I wouldn't count on it if you're not yet a retiree. If you're already retired, your payments are going to continue. Don't misunderstand me. But if you're a young person and you're counting that 30 years from now, Social Security is going to be there to take care of you, don't. It's not. They're going to have to cut benefits. And the thing that scares me the most, Kirby, is means testing. So a lot of prudent savers have saved money and put money away aside from Social Security. And I think they're going to look at it at some point and say, well, you don't need Social Security. You've already put some money aside, so you don't need it, and we're going to take it away from you and give it to somebody that didn't save any money. And that's just the wrong message to send to a generation.
And again, I think that is sooner or later going to happen as well. And this is one of the reasons why many of our callers over the years have said, I don't like the fact that they refer to Social Security and Medicare as entitlements because it sounds like, well, I'm entitled to it. No, I paid into the system. But you have a situation where some people may in the future find that they pay into the system. And they'll say, I appreciate you paid into the system, but you're not going to receive anything from that system simply because it turns out that you made too much money and you should not be able to actually receive even what you paid into the system back again because we just can't afford to pay everybody. And so these are the kind of challenges I think we face in the future. And I'll take some more calls after you go. But I thought just for the next couple of minutes, let's talk about if people want more information. We have a link to your website, but you also were gracious enough to make available to some of our point of view listeners something. So let's talk about that.
Well, only point of view listeners. Actually, this is a $19.95 package, $20. I usually sell on the website. It is a package of 3 audio CDs. Now, you mentioned the Federal Reserve. The first one is a half-hour audio CD on the Federal Reserve, what it is, how it operates. The second is what a definition of money. What is a dollar? we're saving them, we're putting away dollars, but we don't even know what they are. And then the third, this was for the lady in Texas, protecting your wealth, how to buy gold and silver coins and put them away in your vault and save them in your possession. In fact, we're running a special for Point of View listeners, a quarter-ounce $5 gold piece from the 1880. Now, do your math. Gold is $1,230 an ounce, and this is a quarter-ounce gold piece that you can buy for $375. So there are great values in today's market, and you can access them by giving us a call at 800-468-2646. Now, mention Point of View, and no one will ask for a credit card. Just say that you heard it on Kerby Anderson, that you can get the free CD package. We'll send it to you. We'll even cover the postage. No obligation to buy anything. But I think once you read this information and understand, you'll start a savings program with gold and silver coins. There are things that, we should be doing right now to prepare for the crisis. Put a pantry in. Get some emergency food stores. Put some gold and silver coins away, and be ready. Don't find yourself as one of those folks having to show up in the line with your hand out looking for free something. Take care of yourself. Take care of your family. And remember what it says on our paper money, in God we trust. And that's what you need to do.
Again, I might just mention we have a link to the website. It has all those numbers and information as well. And again, the Federal Reserve, you've been talking about for some time the need to audit the Federal Reserve, and I hope that someday we will do so, because there are just a lot of questions that you would expect from a government agency. Now, I recognize it's a quasi-government agency, but if people want to read a little bit more about that, they'll find that on the website as well, because there's a section there called Audit the Federal Reserve, and it tells you a little bit more about that. So, Andy, I appreciate the work that you're doing. I appreciate you answering some of the questions that people have about some of these finances. So thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Thank you, my friend. Be ready. That's the thing, because it comes in the night. It doesn't, you're not going to have a lot of warnings. Be ready, folks. Number again, 800-468-2646. Mention Kerby Anderson or Point of View and get your CDs on the house.
Thank you. Let's take a break. Just before we do so, though, Trey in Georgia, I think you had a question that you wanted to put on the table, so let's put it on the table, and we'll see if we can answer it after the break.
Okay. Yeah, I was wanting to know about home interest rates going into 2019, if anybody had any futures on that. I have recently sold our home and have a contract on a new home, and I'm in a good position where I'm able to pay myself a mortgage every month and put back a good bit of money going in to put down on the down payment and pay cash for closing costs and things like that. But I didn't know if I would be better off to go ahead and purchase the home if the interest rate was going to continue to grow at a high rate by the time closing date in May is coming.
Yeah, and again, you might want to even contact Jerry Tuma on that a little bit later, but it does seem to me like the interest rates are going to go up just in light of some of the things we've just been talking about. Let's take a break. We got a lot more to cover right after this.
Why should you become a partner with Point of View Radio? Because for decades, this team has made a significant difference in lives and communities across the nation. Because America is dying for lack of biblical wisdom about life and culture. You should give because your gift will make possible cutting-edge information on issues that matter, information you won't hear anywhere else. Why? Because your gift will change lives, because you'll influence our culture with biblical truth, and because you can make a difference for the future. Our nation needs a truth team very badly. Support Point of View Radio today at pointofview.net. Click on Join the Truth Team and choose your level of support. Pointofview.net or call 800-347-5151. 800-347-5151. Or mail that first donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Box 30, Dallas 75221. Point of View will continue after this.
listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Final half hour, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. One of the other articles I want to get to in just a minute about, it's entitled Flawed Media Coverage of Obama Hurts America Still. And it's just a good example of how sometimes when we don't get honest reporting about very significant events, it can really skew our view of the world. So I do want to talk about that in just a minute. Trey asked a good question just a minute ago. He's thinking, okay, well, is the inflation, first of all, is the interest rates going to go up? Of course, I was just at the break here talking about this issue of inflation because we've actually heard Jerry Tuma suggesting that maybe that's going to take place. And this is where I think you just need to go and sit down with somebody that can give you a little more perspective, because you say, okay, should I buy how much money do I have in the bank? How much do I have for retirement? Do I have liquidity? Where are the interest rates going to go? It requires a little bit more of specificity. And, of course, as we've already pointed out on this program, we try to give you some general principles. But obviously, when you're dealing with some of these general principles, everybody's situation is unique. And so I would highly recommend, getting a chance to talk with Jerry Tuma, one of the counselors, and getting some more specificity. But we've had some of you wanting to talk about the issue of Medicare. And so I wanted to take those phone calls before I get to one of the articles we've posted for our discussion today. So let's go to Georgia. First of all, Ken on the Good News Network. What would you like to add to our conversation today?
Yeah, I don't pay that $134 because I get both Medicare and Medicaid, and the average, I think, Social Security check is, although it ranges anywhere from probably $300 to $6,000 or something in the thousands, the average is, I think, like 1,070 or something like that. And most people who get a little over 1,000 qualify for Medicaid if that's all of their income. And if they do qualify for both Medicare and Medicaid, then Medicaid is a program for the poor. Then Medicare will pay for the $134 and based on your eligibility for Medicaid, and they will stop charging that $134. I also wanted to, if I can touch on a few things.
Sure.
I think most people don't know how to where to take a $38 silver coin, except to a gold and silver shop or a pawn shop, and there they wouldn't get anywhere near that. A couple other things. The safety net of Social Security is the main thing about Social Security. I know a lot of people could pay all kinds of money in there, but the main priority is the safety net. And I think that people who can't on Social Security can't afford the stock market, but they can save up on goods that they use all the time and stock up on a year's supply of this and a year's supply of that if they can manage it.
Yeah,
and,
like I said, sometimes the best investment, we were just talking about this off air. It's interesting. Steve and I were just talking about that a minute ago. Just buying cans, making good investments, if you will, in the food that you're going to eat, in the toiletries that you're going to use, whatever it might be. That's also wise stewardship, and something that, by the way, I talk about in my book, Christians and Economics, a Biblical Point of View, because whatever the resources God puts in your hands, if you're a wise steward of those, that's something that I think is God honoring. So I think you got a very good point there. Go ahead.
Sure. Yeah. Am I still on?
You're still on. I'm still listening.
Well, one other thing is there's like $1.5 trillion in student loans, and I think that for people who haven't been able to make payments for 10 years, that they should stop the interest on student loans where people can't pay it. They got people get to a point where they've never gotten a degree. There are other circumstances that take too long to explain in a minute, and they should stop the interest. And they need to help people with root canals. Medicare and Medicaid deliberately don't help anybody with root canals. and that's an out-of-pocket expense.
Well, again, you've got all sorts of issues that really need to be addressed, and that one, a student loan, and just the whole issue of indebtedness, whether it is the federal government, which is in debt, whether it's consumers that are in debt, or in the case that you just mentioned, student debt and some of those, just very significant issues that we may hear something about from the Democratic leadership in Congress, but then again, those may just get to be ignored. So we'll see where it goes. But the situation that happens when you aren't even paying the interest on the debt, and you're not obviously paying the principal on the debt, and it just keeps mounting and gets larger and larger every year, there is a point in time in which you've got to wonder whether or not the government is just going to say, we need to not only bail out, as we did in the past, General Motors, look how that turned out, we need to bail out the student loan program. And so we'll see where that takes us, and that's just another topic that we will try to address sometime here on Point of View. Let me just, before we run out of time, though, get to one of the articles we've posted today. We did want to talk about some of these economic issues, as we've done with Andrew Gause and Jerry Tuma, but also thought it would be helpful, as we so often hear talk about on Point of View, the need for you to have some level of discernment. And David French put it this way. He said, I knew the instant I saw Twitter erupt in outrage over the use of tear gas to disperse a crowd of people charging our southern border, that someone would find an example of the Obama administration doing the same thing. And sure enough, there it was. And it was shared far and wide within minutes, this article coming from the San Diego Union Tribune story in 2013. Here's what it said. A group of about 100 people trying to illegally cross the border Sunday near the San Ysidro point of entry threw rocks and bottles at U.S. Border Patrol agents who responded by using pepper spray and other means to force the crowd back into Mexico, federal officials said. Now, I was tempted, but I didn't want to try to confuse you, but I was tempted to read that first and then say, when did that happen? And the first thing you'd say is, well, that just happened Sunday. No, it happened 5 years before. And the point that he is making here is that Twitter existed in 2013. I was on it and certainly don't recall any eruption of outrage followed by days of think pieces explaining the horrors of pepper spray or the deep betrayal of American values. And the point he was making is that let's just be very honest. Some of those stories that now have caused people to be so upset and to be so outraged actually took place in the past. But because the press and many of the commentators liked President Barack Obama, and because the press and many of these commentators now dislike, that's a calm word, maybe the word hate is appropriate, President Donald Trump, you have two remarkably different reactions to that. And he reminds us, for example, that there was an enormous spike in kids crossing the border and a situation in which we didn't have enough shelter facilities. So again, you had back then Border Patrol locking some of them up, but the argument was that this was temporary, and we were told that the Obama administration took care of the kids as they left the lockup, right? Well, not exactly. Here comes from a report that appeared before the U.S. Senate, in which it said over a period of 4 months in 2014, Department of Health and Human Services allegedly placed a number of unaccompanied alien children in the hands of a ring of human traffickers who forced them to work on egg farms in and around Ohio, leading to, as it talks about, a federal criminal indictment. According to the indictment, minor victims were forced to work 6 or 7 days a week, 12 hours a day. The traffickers repeatedly threatened the victims and their families with physical harm and even death if they did not work or surrender their entire paychecks. The indictment alleges that the defendants used a combination of threats, humiliation, deprivation, financial coercion, debt manipulation, and monitoring to create a climate of fear and helplessness that would compel the victims' compliance. And so that was happening back then. And then he goes through a whole series of things. You know, after all, it was the so-called peace president of Barack Obama who ordered 10 times more drone strikes than George W. Bush. It was the so-called environmental president again, Barack Obama, president, who was so hostile to fossil fuels that he presided over an extraordinary boom in domestic oil production. And it was the compassionate president, President Barack Obama, who admitted a grand total of fewer than 2,000 Syrian refugees in the first 5 years of the Syrian civil war. And it was an individual who also actually deported more individuals in fiscal year 2012, 34,000 individuals. And of course, we heard very little about that. But of course, now when President Donald Trump does it, just a different story. So I wanted to post that once again, just to remind us, have discernment when you hear things on the radio, when you see things on television, when you read them on the internet. We'll be right back.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dys. The Washington Area Metropolitan Transit Authority, Metro for short, ferries commuters by rail and bus throughout the nation's capital. In addition to commuters, they also carry advertisements. And at Christmas time, those advertisements look very Christmassy. There are Christmas gifts pictured, lots of red and green, and not too few holiday puns designed to persuade you to buy stuff. The Archdiocese of Washington, D.C. also submitted an advertisement. It pictured a few shepherds and sheep under a starry sky with the message, "Find the perfect gift," scrolled artfully across the sky. At the website displayed in the ad, one finds out that the perfect gift is Jesus, quote, "the perfect gift of God's love this Christmas." But Metro rejected the ad. Macy's and other stores plying the Christmas theme were all right, but according to Metro, there are two halves at Christmas, the secular and the religious. Secular ads are okay, but all religious ads are forbidden. Yeah, Metro will take Santa, but not Jesus, 3 French hens, but not the 3 wise men. Even the president's own remarks at the recent national tree lighting could not appear on the side of a Metro bus. But that's not the law. First Liberty is submitting arguments to courts in Washington, D.C., explaining that what Metro is actually doing is called viewpoint discrimination and is a type of hostility towards religion that the First Amendment forbids. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
Hi, I'm Kelly Shackelford, President and Chief Counsel of First Liberty Institute. I hope you enjoyed this episode of First Liberty Briefing. You can learn more amazing stories about how everyday Americans are standing up and saving religious freedom. Just visit firstliberty.org. You'll be inspired, educated, and informed. Visit firstliberty.org right now.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes. You know, one of the things I was talking about is the need for discernment. And one of the difficulties is, especially when you're dealing with some of these scientific topics, even though I have scientific degrees, I still say, who do you believe sometimes? And a good example of that happened a couple of weeks ago, in which you had a paper that was published in Nature. Now, if you're not familiar, Nature is kind of the scientific journal of record for the UK, for the British. And it suggested that ocean temperatures had risen roughly 60% higher than what was estimated by the UN Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. Now, that was of concern because what we were being told when that first came out just about a month ago. It was published October 31st on Halloween. Good way to remember that. Is that the oceans are warming much faster than we predicted. And so that said, well, that could mean all sorts of things for the coral in the oceans. It could affect the fish. It could affect the climate as well. Recognize that 3/4 of the surface of the earth is ocean. So that was of real concern. Okay, let's tell the rest of the story now. It turns out that after it was published, there were people that looked at the methodology and said, that's not even right. You made a major mistake in a reported journal article that appeared in Nature. And so as a result, there were people that pointed that out. And so when I've seen this come out, I saw this wonderful article that said, we're waiting for the media's correction on the ocean warming story. I guess we're still waiting for it. But it turns out that there was a mathematician, Nicholas Lewis, who specializes in statistical analysis. And he basically looked at this and said that these scientists grossly overestimated the amount of warming to the world's ocean. And consequently, they wrongly concluded that the lower end, now we'll get into some technical words, the equilibrium climate sensitivity, that is the amount of the global average surface temperature and all that, would be raised from the one that was used by the UN. Now, in this particular case, the climate scientist at Scripps Institution for Oceanography who co-authored the paper said that he and his partner, who is a professor at Princeton, realized the implications of the mistake once it was pointed out by Nicholas Lewis. And so when they were confronted with that, it became clear that that was an issue, and so they were willing to revise that. But again, you can see that what was a breathless announcement a month ago has, as far as I can tell, probably not been significantly corrected in the media. So sometimes you say, who do I believe? Well, maybe I need to wait a little bit and see whether or not this breathless announcement is all that it's cracked up to be. In this case, it might have been a statistical error. Which brings me to what just happened a few hours ago, and that is we've had some of these reports that come from the government climate study. And interestingly enough, this study, which according to Associated Press was done before we had these catastrophic wildfires in California, and really even while we were in the midst of having two devastating hurricanes, illustrates even more so how we're at the edge of an apocalypse, if you'd believe some of the things in this national climate assessment that suggests that we are really going to be suffering tremendously because the latest national climate assessment, which comes from the government, says that warming-charged extremes have already become more frequent, intense, and widespread or of long duration. So the argument is that this indeed is going to mean that we'll have more of these wildfires, we're going to have more of these hurricanes, and the report, by the way, is mandated by law. Every few years you are to pull together some of the research studies, and it actually suggests that we are headed for a major catastrophe. And if you don't think so, newly elected representative from New York, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, in one of the tweets I have in front of me here, said, people are going to die if we don't start addressing climate change as soon as possible. It's not enough to think it's important. We must make it urgent. That's why we need a select committee on a Green New Deal and why fossil fuel-funded officials shouldn't be writing climate change policy. So I, by the way, have an article coming out on the so-called Green New Deal. But it's interesting because this national climate assessment that has been released now has been challenged in a variety of different ways. The simple answer to this, since I won't spend all of our time on it, is that it assumes that the world will be 15 degrees Fahrenheit warmer by the year 2010. That is twice what even the Hair on Fire United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change have predicted, which itself is probably very extreme. It assumes that we're going to spend more and more on coal burning, and so we'll be burning more coal at a time when it seems to me that, if anything, we're going to probably be using more natural gas. And so, as one particular scientist has said, Myron Ebel, the assessment is full of dubious and outright junk science that does not meet the minimal standards required by the Information Quality Act. The alarmist claims about the rate and impacts of global warming are based upon discredited computer models rather than data. And contrary to the assessment's conclusions, the rate of warming continues to be modest and the impacts continue to be mild. And I saw that Cal Thomas, who's not a scientist but a commentator, said that here we have another one of these reports that concludes that we only have 10 years to fix it. And he puts it in context. He said, when we see these end-of-the-world prophecies, whether from a self-deluded preacher, a group of politicians, or in this case scientists, we're told we must believe. But he says, wait a minute, haven't there already been earlier deadlines saying that we only have 10 years to fix it? And that was 20 or 30 years ago. And as a result, it's interesting because he points out that anybody who might disagree with some of this actually is being called a particular name. He quotes from one individual that says anybody who disagrees with global warming is depraved. And his comment is, when you resort to name calling, you've lost the argument. But again, as I point out, a climate expert at University of Colorado, I believe is where he is located, says that this claim is all based upon a 15-degree increase, which is double the most extreme value that you've found in any of those reports. And so as a result, just illustrates again that sometimes when you have these reports coming out, you don't know who to believe. But if you dig a little bit further, you begin to recognize that when they're calling you names, when they're saying that we have to act immediately or it's the end of life as we know it, and when they are using numbers which are twice as large as the numbers that were used even in the last report that was trying to tell us that we have only a few years left to live, maybe it's time to calm down just a little bit. And so as a result, there is just a need for us to read widely, to ask questions, and to, in many cases here on Point of View, bring some experts that might say it's not as bad as you might have thought that it was going to be. We've heard this before, and I just wanted to end with this. I know tomorrow we won't have any scientists around the round table, so I thought I'd at least focus on this issue of climate change, which is in the news all the time. And if you go and look at some of the Twitter feeds, you would think that it is the end of the world as we know it. I don't think so. I think we'll be around a little bit longer. Nevertheless, it's been a busy day, so we are going to postpone the rest of our conversation to tomorrow's weekend edition. I want to thank Andrew and Steve for their help behind the scenes. We'll see you back here tomorrow on Point of View.
There is no more dangerous time than when things are going well. Remember Elijah on Mount Carmel? Fire came down. There was no doubt who was God, but what happened next? He went from amazing faith to a time of great fear and depression. Many Christians have been very thankful a certain Democratic candidate for president was not the one to nominate two replacements for the Supreme Court. But as with Elijah, times of great victory are also times of great danger. Moments like this are not the time to take it easy. This is not the time to let our guard down. This is a time to double down on our work in the community, to serve and pray and plan and invest in a better future. This is the time to join Point of View's Truth Team 360 to make sure today's promising gains are not lost tomorrow. Show your commitment to our future by visiting pointofview.net/team or call 800-347-5151. Ask to join the Truth Team. Pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151.